So let's look at how we can target particular elements on a page in JavaScript so that we can add interactions. For example, if I were to click on this, could we make something else on the page react? Okay, so we would need to target this, and we would need to target whatever else on the page is reacting. Okay, and remember, that's where JavaScript really excels. It's one way it excels is by creating these types of really cool interactions in the browser. So first we need to be able to select elements. We remember in CSS, we can do that. We can target particular elements by writing down inside of a style tag or in a separate style document, right? A CSS document. You could target that H1 in particular by doing something like that and saying color red. If I refresh, it's red now. Or likewise, I could give it an ID and say, okay, let's call it main heading, whatever we want to call it. And then if I say hashtag main heading, and I'll just change this to something else, maybe give it a font size of 100 pixels, and save that, it'll now show up as 100 pixels. So we can target using IDs as well as the actual selector itself, the HTML element itself. And likewise, we can even target by class names. If we did the dot syntax and said, give it whatever name, I'll just say something. And any element on the page that has class with the same name will get the same rule applied to it. So if I refresh the page, nothing should change, right? Or how about we just change this font size to 200 to demonstrate? Okay, so now anything inside the body tag that has that class name will get this rule applied to it. And there we go. It worked. So let's see how we can do this now in JavaScript. We'll get rid of that stuff. And what we'll do is give this an ID and just say main heading again. Okay, so in JavaScript, the way we can select it is we need a script tag, and we want to put it at the bottom of the page, okay? And you can have this type equals text JavaScript if you want. It's optional. You don't need it. So if I want to target this particular H1, I can do it a few ways. Let's look at one of the first ways you can do it. You can say document.getElement by ID. And look at the capital letters here. It's camel case, okay? So lowercase g, and then everything else has a capital letter in for the first letter. Every word does. Okay? And notice that the D isn't capitalized, okay? It's lowercase. So, and then in parentheses, I can write with quotation marks, so like a string, I can pass in a string into this function and say, okay, let's pass in main heading. Okay, so just simply doing this, I'm able to select this particular H1, okay? Let's refresh the page. Nothing will happen, okay? It just goes back to the way it was. We got rid of the CSS. But in the JavaScript, I have now selected that particular element. Okay, so when you're writing JavaScript applications, you do want to keep things organized, so it's very common to put this inside of a variable. And let's give that variable a name. We'll just say H for now, just one letter. So H stands for heading, let's say. Okay, so we've got this variable called H, and it's selecting that H1. And I can prove that by right-clicking and saying inspect element, go over to the console tab, and then hit H. And there we go. JavaScript knows what I mean by H now, and I'm referring to that H1 in there. Okay, so that's one way to select, is you can select by ID, okay? And you use this special function here called getElement by ID. And we're doing that with this dot syntax right under the document. If you remember from the DOM example, right? In HTML DOM, the document is the parent object, okay? So it's the main object in the tree, and so we're saying, okay, first reach in and grab this document, and then let's use a function, okay? Remember, every object has properties, which are like variables, and they also have methods, which are like functions. This is just a method that belongs to this document object. It's written somewhere inside the JavaScript library, and the browser has knowledge of it. It's loaded inside the browser. So by default, you kind of get this kind of functionality for free when you run a browser and run this kind of code inside a browser. So let's try something else to it. Now that we have this stored in a variable, we could do something like h.style and then font size. And this is how you would affect the font size in JavaScript. So now if I save this and refresh, there you go. We're seeing the result. Now keep in mind, you wouldn't want to do something like this. You wouldn't want to write your CSS changes with JavaScript. We'll show you kind of a better way to do that down the line, but keep in mind it is possible. You can do something like this. So again, from this document .getElementById, we're able to now use change these other properties. Okay, these are just nested properties inside the document object. Okay, so one other thing I want to point out, this is a really important point here, is notice that we have this variable h, and remember, I've talked about variables quite a bit, but they're just a way of representing something on the other side of the equal sign. Okay, so I could technically copy all this and replace this h with all of that. So if I did that, save it, and refresh, you'll see that we get the same result. Okay, but it's just easier to put an h there. It's a little bit cleaner, okay? And just know that the h is simply pointing to this. And the reason why I want to make that very clear and reiterate that is because when you're working on complex, projects or larger projects, okay? Real world projects will have many variables, and they're going to be many lines of code. Okay, so you're going to see variables kind of thrown everywhere, and all you need to do is kind of follow the paper trail. Make sure you follow it back to where it was first set, and then in your mind, use your imagination and assume that whenever you see that variable, it really just represents what was stored there. Okay, which in this case is this, stored in that h. You can kind of interchangeably, kind of interchange them mentally. And by doing that, you'll understand code better. You'll see a lot of variables down inside your code, like a variable with whatever name. But by mentally kind of pointing back to what it was set to, you'll understand a little bit better of what's going on. Okay? So we'll come back to that concept. But anyway, so that's one way of selecting elements on a page, right? We can target by the ID name. Now, let's look at another way we could do it. We can target elements by class names. Okay, so we can do it like this. Get element with an S this time, okay? So it's plural. Get elements by class name. Okay, and then what we can do is, let's just add a few more elements to this page, like a paragraph. Give it a class of just something like that, para. And let's put something inside. So we could say lorem tab. And in Sublime Text, it'll automatically load up some lorem ipsum. That's just kind of a developer's way of adding placeholder text. So I'll shorten it a little bit. And let's add another paragraph as well with the same class name. So now we've got this heading and two paragraph tags. So what we can do is use this special method here, document.getElements by class name. And then what we need to do is put in the particular class or classes that we want to grab. So let's just grab this para. Okay, and if I save it and refresh, we've now grabbed it and we've stored it inside. We'll just put it inside a variable called p for now to be a little bit more consistent. Now if I refresh, nothing's going to change, but now if I go into my console and type p, it knows what I'm talking about. It knows that I'm referring to both of these. Remember, we're saying get elements, not get element by ID. It's plural here. And therefore, when you do this, you're going to get back an array. This is an array. Remember the opening square brackets and closing square brackets right here. That's an array. And so when you use this method, you got to remember that you're not getting back a single object like we did with get element by ID. You're getting back an array of objects. Okay, so how do you access a particular one if we just wanted to affect the first one? remember all we do is grab this variable name, and it's array access notation. We just do P, and remember arrays start at 0, and that's how we grab that first one. If we wanted to grab the second one, we would do P1, and so on. If there were 3 or more, you could just keep using, the different ones. Notice P1 will grab the second one, P0 will grab the first one. Okay, so that's how we can select with class names. Let's look at just a few others. There's also get elements by tag name. And what we can do is just put a P in there, and that's the paragraph tag. If I do it now, same deal. We're able to get it not by class names, but by the actual HTML tag. So likewise, I could do H1 in here. If I refresh, now P is equal to this H1. Okay, the header. And then finally, another one that you'll see quite a bit is get elements, or actually it's called query selector. Okay, and this one's really cool because you can just put simple CSS in here. We could put anything. We could put H1. So if I save that, let's see what P equals. It's that H1, right? We could also put an ID in here. So we could do something like this. Main heading. And this time you want the pound sign. If I refresh and hit P, same thing. We got it by its ID name. So it's a little more universal, right? Query selector will allow us to grab things using CSS, basically. The same way we would use a CSS selector. Okay? So I can also do class names in here. If I do para, right, because that's the class name we created, and save that. If I refresh now and hit P, we're able to grab it. But notice we don't get an array back here. We get just the first one. It'll go and grab the first element that has that class name if you have multiple elements in your body that have the same class. So how do we get all of them? Well, you can do a modified version of this. It's called query selector all. And that's going to bring back all the elements that have whatever CSS selector we put in here. So save that. If I hit P now, you get an array back. Okay, so I know that that's a lot to kind of absorb, but just remember you're going to see these in your JavaScript. There are a few different ways you can select elements in here. I think the most common is going to be document.get element by ID, or you might see get elements by class name. But honestly, you'll see these quite a bit. It's helpful to just know so that you know how to reach into a document and get things. And then I just want to point out that you can go to the JavaScript reference at W3 Schools and kind of see all the different things you can do with that document object. There's quite a bit. And remember, don't try to memorize all of them when you're new to it, but just look at them so that you can see what you're capable of. Use it as a reference. If you're curious about, oh, can I do this with the document or this with the JavaScript, you can kind of go in there and read about it and see all the different things you can do. You can do quite a bit of stuff. You can write HTML directly into a document. So for example, if I did document.write and we just put, say H2 and say new header, we can inject that into an actual JavaScript document right there. When I refresh, it adds it to the bottom of the page. So there are a lot of things you can do. Some things are better to do than others in terms of, performance and speed, page speed. You want to be conscious of that. So you can Google around and kind of see, but just remember the W3 Schools website does have this reference, the DOM reference, where you can kind of see what you can do with the document. So that's a little bit about selecting particular elements on a page with JavaScript.